As you heard from Vice President Pence, the Trump administration believes the death of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi will have a measurable impact on ISIS. But the vice president also said that the U.S. mission in Syria will continue, despite President Trump's initial order to withdraw. Nick Schifrin is back to explore the implications of the death of one of the world's most wanted men.
What is the future of U.S. policy in Syria, and how will Baghdadi's death change ISIS? To discuss that, I'm joined by Hassan Hassan, the co-author of ISIS Inside the Army of Terror and a director at the Center for Global Policy, and Mike Leiter, who directed the National Counterterrorism Center for 5 years, beginning at the end of the Bush administration. He's now a national security partner at the law firm Skadden Arps, and welcome to you both. Welcome back to the NewsHour, I should say. Hassan Hassan, let me start with you. You wrote today that al-Baghdadi's death might be more significant than Osama bin Laden's death. Why is that?
I do think so, because by the time bin Laden was killed in Abbottabad in 2011, he had already been far removed from the day-to-day reality of Al-Qaeda. He wasn't as relevant as Baghdadi before he was killed. Baghdadi was commanding an organization that was determined to return and revive its savage caliphate. He was pretty much on the ground, meeting his lieutenants. He was running the organization, and he was basically hands-on. So the impact of his killing could be far more, more far-reaching than the killing of Osama bin Laden in 2011, which happened a decade after 9/11.
Mike Leiter, Baghdadi not only ran ISIS inside Iraq and Syria, where we've been so focused, but ISIS became, of course, synonymous with global terrorism. Does the risk of global terrorism change at all now that Baghdadi's dead?
I think it may a little bit in the short term, and I think Hassan makes an excellent point that Baghdadi, unlike Osama bin Laden in 2011, really was deeply tied to ISIS's operational planning. So there'll be a little hiccup there. But fundamentally, in my view, I don't think that the threat of violent Sunni extremists really changes at this point. The fact is that ISIS had already lost its physical caliphate, and it had become a global network of inspiration and loose coordination across many nations and into the West. And Baghdadi is as important as he was. His death does not take away that basic inspiration. The same basic playbook of small-scale attacks still, I think, poses roughly the same risk as it did before this raid.
So, Hassan, we've seen ISIS morph, as Mike Leiter was just saying, from a caliphate, from controlling territory, back to an insurgency.
That's right.
In Iraq and Syria, and further splintering, perhaps, all over the world. So can Baghdadi's death mean that momentum continues into an insurgency, into kind of further splintering around the world, given that he was controlling things and kind of keeping things unified?
Yeah, that's really the big question. I'm torn about this because, on one hand, Baghdadi, unlike any other leader that will follow him within ISIS, he built a legacy way before he announced a caliphate in 2014. He led the organization for 9 years. He actually brought the organization up from the ashes, the defeat in 2008. He managed to actually bring it back from the dead, essentially. He expanded the organization from being an Iraqi organization into an Iraqi and a Syrian organization. That's why he called the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. And he turned it into a global organization before he announced, declared himself to be a caliph in 2014 and became this global organization. I think he had already managed to create this brand that will survive his death, but the timing of his killing is very sensitive, and that's why I say the United States has a small window, perhaps, to keep the pressure and keep the organization down and prevent it from becoming a large organization in the future, prevent it from basically reviving itself.
So, Mike Leiter, let's use that to turn toward U.S. policy in Syria. Of course, we've been focusing so much on President Trump's decision to withdraw over the last couple of weeks. But we heard Secretary Esper today say specifically that the U.S. mission in Syria has not changed. It remains the same since 2014. And senior administration official talking to a few of us today said that the goals of the U.S. policy in Syria remain the same. Number one, defeat ISIS. And so it seems that despite the president's rhetoric over the last couple of weeks, the strategy actually remains the same.
And it's very interesting from Vice President Pence's interview as well, taking a very similar line of, yes, removing U.S. troops from one section, but fundamentally the mission not changing. And I think that's quite good because, as Hassan notes, there's a strategic point at which we can now attack ISIS with Baghdadi gone, and there are tactical opportunities with the information that was garnered from the successful raid. So I hope that that is the case. This is exactly the time to accelerate operations against ISIS so it can't recuperate quickly from this win against Baghdadi. I think the challenge we face, of course, is some of our ability to now collect intelligence, to have a reliable partner on the ground in the Kurds is still diminished by the president's decision to withdraw from that area. And with that has also come the release of some previous ISIS detainees. So at exactly the time where I think we should be most aggressive, we do face some very practical and challenging consequences from our withdrawal of that region and how it's affected the Kurds.
Hassan, quickly, what would happen if the U.S. is not able to keep this pressure that you guys are both talking about on ISIS?
I think ISIS will be reinvigorated again. ISIS will be galvanized by the sense of revenge, and they want to take, advantage of the fact that everyone is angry within the organization, and that runs the danger, the risk of ISIS quickly seizing on this vacuum in Syria and Iraq to emerge. Remember, Syria and Iraq have always been and will always be the center of gravity for ISIS. So if you take the pressure off ISIS in those two countries, then ISIS will be back.
And Mike Leiter, you brought up the Kurds, and I want to ask you specifically about this in the time we have left. A senior administration official told me today that they played a, quote, very important role. No one should underestimate their importance in Baghdadi's death. After Baghdadi's death, the U.S. And Kurdish fighters killed the spokesman of ISIS. Trump administration vowing to maintain this strategy. Is that enough to maintain what is clearly a vital relationship?
We have to invest, and our intelligence community and Department of Defense, I think, will continue to invest in that relationship. The Kurds have been with the United States for decades now. I think we have a practical need to work with them, but we also, in my view, have a true moral imperative to stand by those who have stood by us.
Mike Leiter, Hassan, thank you very much to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.